And welcome back to Level Up Test Prep. So let's examine this question, and I'd like to provide you some more answers here. When dealing with an evaluate the extent question, it wants to know how much change there was. So how much change was there from the Democratic Party or within the Democratic Party from 1929 to 1969? So here it wants you to think about the stock market. And if you recall from the other video, your answer should never be 0 or 100. The answer is always going to fall somewhere in between these parameters, and that's how you're going to frame your answer. So I'm going to scroll down a bit. One topic you could focus on, so if you were to write this, you could write about economics. You could write about civil rights and how did they change on that. You could argue about their foreign policy. You could write about their views on everything from welfare to infrastructure, to even messaging, right? How do they even present themselves to others? Now, it says Democratic Party. It doesn't say Democratic Party officials. It says Democratic Party. So you could even talk about the people that simply voted for Democrats or made up the larger Democratic Party electorate. But for this reason, for this example tutorial, we're going to focus on civil rights. So we want to think from 1929 to 1969. That means we're thinking about FDR, Franklin Roosevelt. We're thinking about FDR to Truman to JFK to LBJ. So 1930s, 1940s, and then 1960s. So the point of your response is to just simply say, how is FDR different from Truman? How is Truman different from JFK? How is LBJ different from JFK? And you could talk about the transitional process of how they changed their attitudes towards the government's role in civic life or economic life. You can talk about how they approach world affairs, but again, for this example, we're going to really just focus on civil rights. So let me start with Truman in the middle here. Truman began to desegregate the military. But he was what you would call a moderate on civil rights. He wasn't a very strong advocate. He wasn't willing to risk it. He was more calculated, more methodical, willing to play within the lines, if you will, on civil rights. It wasn't his top priority. FDR, his top priority at the time was economics. Now, you could say that he began to open up conversations with black union leaders. Open conversations. And was friendly to the idea of civil rights. And he was very sympathetic, but he was not, again, a strong advocate. You could, again, say he was a moderate. So that's the key word there. I'm going to actually highlight that red. We have a moderate here and a moderate here. JFK, I would say, also began as a moderate. on civil rights, but over time he saw what it was doing to America, because the civil rights protests and movement is really going to kick up in the 1960s. And he was accepting of civil rights legislations. But it was LBJ who signed the major landmark civil rights legislations and Voting Rights Act. Now, many historians believe that JFK would have signed it if he had lived long enough or served a second term. So he was certainly on that path, but LBJ helped transform the Democratic Party into the party of civil rights. Now, this is really important to note that the Democrats also had Dixiecrats, Southern segregationist Democrats, and over time, their power went down. So I'm going to give you a chart here. Right, their power went down, and they were losing their ability to defend segregation, and eventually lost to the civil rights wing of the Democratic Party, and eventually lost to the civil rights wing of the Republican Party as well. So that is how the Democratic Party changed. I'm not explaining the reasons why they were elected. I'm not explaining why the Republicans lost. That's actually not what the question is asking. The question asks for evaluate the extent to which the Democratic Party changed from 1929 to 1969. And a civil rights framework would say, well, they started off as moderates with FDR through Truman. JFK was more friendly to the civil rights movement, more supportive, and was actually working with MLK and has a series of correspondence with him. And the Kennedy family is having meetings with him and other civil rights leaders. And after JFK's assassination, when LBJ took power, there was just a score of civil rights legislations and Voting Rights Acts signed off on, and the Democratic Party then became the party of civil rights, and they were able to drop or weaken their Dixiecratic wing. And there you go. That's that one paragraph, or that would make for an excellent body paragraph in such a question if you were asked to evaluate the extent to which the Democratic Party changed from 1929 to 1969.